Can I uh can I be heard? All right.
Yeah,
I'm going to continue. Hopefully that echo will go away. Looks like
yeah.
it's going to. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for the opportunity to speak as a son of Africans enslaved in the United States in Alabama, North Carolina, and Tennessee. I'll call the name of my mother's grandparents, Peter Hayes and Mobby Hayes, North Carolina and Alabama, respectively. While migration, and what I'm about to say really isn't new, I'm just adding my voice to those calling for creative ways to approach specific questions of eligibility. While migration is the central theme in human history, violent, modern forced migrations, as the consequence of settler colonialism, provide direct source and context for the modern world systems of nation states. Global, regional, national, and local obligations and efforts to address and remedy ongoing effects of harm against specific groups deprived of natural and human resources by these serial forced migrations present discrete polities with an opportunity to model a wide variety of repair methods. Consequently, the United States State of California Task Force to Study and Develop Reparations Proposal for African Americans may find it useful to consider the following four broad assertions, pursuant especially to considering defining eligibility beyond race and lineage, which of course carries on its own particular problems of relying on record keeping, among other things, by those who had us enslaved and not even as human until the mid 19th century, is another point of departure for exploring reparative relief for descendants of Africans, for whom group identity as African captives begins as described in Section 8301.1B1A and Section 8301A3 with their capture and procurement on the African continent. And that second section I refer to refers to African citizenship rights, which of course is something that had to be back mapped in history as a legal concept, as we know, if we were to take that route. So here are the four kind of broad assertions I want to make in brief. Number one, demands for and questions of reparations have been raised since before the transformation of Western settler colonies into settler states as a challenge to undertake structural, modern social transformation. The essential guiding question at all levels of policy-provided repair is, quote, how do we decolonize the modern world, end quote, especially when the harm being redressed predates the imposition of today's state borders. Enslavement was illegal at the time that it was going on, of course, and remedies will require organized international networks of will that shape law to will in their specific contexts, and California will be no different in that regard. Number two, questions of race and or lineage have cultural, social, and political definitions that are best addressed by studying how they intersect with, influence, and interact with legal definitions, and also how they function beyond specific legal definitions and broader historical frameworks. Therefore, popular legal notions of race and lineage are inadequate tools for tracing group-based harm. Number three, the racial category of Black, as used in the modern world system, emerges directly out of the process of Western or white colonialism that established Black as coterminous with fluid, racialized, unfree labor regimes, thereby establishing the eligibility category for redressing a global harm through varied local repair efforts. Accordingly, Black merely parrots the paradigm of colonialism and is inappropriate for any effort to aiming to decolonize the modern world. And then finally, number four, polities, country level, regional, state level, local, municipal level. Repair efforts should not automatically preclude any other form of remedy. U.S. state-based efforts, cognizant of the undermining of racially categorized remedies in federal and state law, and I know California, y'all no stranger to that, may find a creative point of entry for proposed remedies by applying to California residents of African descent an overarching concept that recognizes the singularly unique circumstances that made enslavement and Blackness virtually coterminous, allowing a legal status more akin under federal and state constitutional law to date to that enjoyed by Native Americans and other discrete groups of immigrants from other sovereign polities. In other words, recipients of California's repair efforts should suffer no preclusive impact. Now, I'll take the last couple of minutes to kind of go back over those very briefly. The first issue I raised of the four, especially when we're talking about harm that the redress for harm that predates the imposition of today's borders. When we read Martin Luther King, chapters 4 and 5 of Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, he traces the status of Black people in the United States and elsewhere to European attacks on the African continent, and he proposes reparations in the form of educational and employment rights and civil rights and human rights and housing. He proposes them in the context of structural reforms that will aid Black people, but are not exclusive to Black people. That does not preclude specific remedies for Black people, but it does begin to gesture toward, even as he wrote this in 1968, shortly before he was assassinated, it does preclude what had already begun to emerge as an attack on rights-based remedies. Of course, 68 is half a decade before Bakke. We certainly see the turn back, and it doesn't have us relying on that 1938 famous footnote for Carlene Products notion of minorities. In other words, trying to get away from that concept, because we know that the legal challenges will be coming whenever it's proposed. Number two, just briefly as I kind of wind to conclusion, using popular legal notions of race and lineage would be inadequate in many ways, because they rely on the same field of violence that created the harm in the first place. We look at Howard French's recent book, Born in Blackness, where he traces how the French and the Dutch, the Spanish, the Portuguese, they're not the same people, but collectively they all treated the very different peoples of Africa as one people. That's where the creation was created. Colonialism is the point of departure, not enslavement. Enslavement directs the standing practice to the site of the continuing harm, not the original harm. And if we can reposition that, we can address local harm through policymaking in an international and regional network. And in that regard, Chair Moore in particular, your work, I know you're no stranger to some of those arguments, having done work beyond the United States and seeing how we can think creatively in tandem and apply solutions in different places in the world to our local challenges. Finally, and I'll just go through 3 and 4 very quickly. I've got my eye on the clock and I realize I've been talking about 7 minutes. Accordingly, the third of the 4 points I raised, how Blackness in many ways parrots the paradigm of colonialism. Ira Berlin, who was quoted earlier, he did another series of talks at Harvard, and he published in a book called The Long Emancipation, The Demise of Slavery in the United States, where he makes the argument that enslavement in many ways is an asymmetrical war that never had a truce created. And Mario Bedelli makes a similar point in his work, where he says, you never asked Black people what they wanted. Citizenship was extended to us in the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, the Reconstruction era amendments, but there was no poll of Black people. That's impossible. Well, then the question then becomes, how do we start talking about a group harm when the group itself is constantly shifting? The solution to that would be to construct that group not based on legal arguments within the context of specific areas where we've been harmed, but rather to construct that group almost like a class, construct that class before the creation of the state formations we are now seeking redress from. That might obviate the need for a kind of race-based solution that would certainly not be sustained in the federal courts. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I didn't hear you.
My timer went off, just telling you.
Then your timer went off, which means I'm going to stop talking and see if anybody has any questions. Thank you for your time.